and welcome to another episode of Chat EbT. I'm your host, Mohamed Ebrahim Tayob. Now today I have a very special guest with me. As you guys know, we love talking about people that have pivoted in their careers, and my guest today has done that brilliantly. Not only that, but he's actually written a book describing his pivot. Please help me in welcoming Mr. Imraan Soomra to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's our pleasure. So Imraan, usually I always actually ask this question at the end of the show, right? I'm going to flip it up a bit today. I'm going to ask you this question at the beginning because of this big pivot that you've done in your career, right? Mm-hmm. And the question that we ask is, if you had to go back to any point in your life and give yourself a piece of advice, when would you go back to, and what would that advice be?
That's an interesting question, and I think a lot of people, having read the book, ask me exactly that question. I think I answer it by reflecting on the advice I'm giving to my children now.
Okay.
Especially my kids are 25, 23, and 19. So they're at that age where I think the decisions you make around the life you want to live start to manifest themselves in a big way. And my advice to them would be to slow everything down. We live in a world that's consistently busy, where we think if we're busy, we've been productive. Where we think if we're noisy, then there's meaning in our lives. And we were talking offline, I guess, about how taking a step backwards actually isn't necessarily a bad thing, but that's exactly the concept that I'd like them to unlearn. That slowing down isn't taking a step backwards, that slowing down is actually moving forwards, and it creates the space for you to understand what you're running towards and why you're running towards it. So that would be my advice. Slow everything down so that you can connect with what's happening inside of you.
Do you think it's something that we've just been, I'm going to use the term hardwired, in the sense that we always need to be in motion, that's causing us to have this feeling that, no, I can't slow down, I'm going to fall behind?
Yeah, we live, let me say it in another way, we potentially could live two lives. What you're referring to is this life of performance, right? And we learn that from a young age. So when you're young and you deliver a good set of results, you get love from your parents. Or you're on the soccer field and you score a goal, they cheer for you. So we quickly learn in life that when we achieve something, when we deliver output, we get rewarded. And so our life becomes that cycle of perform, get validated. Perform, yes, I exist. Perform, people take notice of me. And so we build our entire lives on this idea that if we're producing, if there's output, then we exist.
I'm very glad you said that, because it reminded me of a very interesting conversation I had with a very close personal friend of mine, right? Mm-hmm. And I like the example that you use, is that we do something great, we get a reward for it, right? His aspect, and he was the first person that actually said this to me, and I found it very interesting, is that what we're doing with our children and what was done by our parents to us through no fault of their own, creates an employee mindset, in the sense of, if you do get a good result, we're going to give you a better allowance, or you're going to get a trip. And it basically creates that I need to do something in order to get something back.
Yes.
And his idea was that we need to flip that. Instead of saying, if you clean your room, I'm going to give you a chocolate, let's say. We need to rather create a leadership or creative mindset, in the sense of, if you learn something new, you then get something back, as opposed to, if you do a task, you're going to get something back.
Yeah, I'd love to meet this friend of yours. It sounds like there's some deep wisdom. You're absolutely right. And for me, I think I think there are 2 points to make. One is that that's how society works, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not just our parents that reward output. Whether you're in the corporate space, and I spent 30 years in the corporate space, we reward performance.
Yes.
Right? We judge how good a person is on whether or not they can solve a problem when there's a problem. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you become the go-to guy when there's a crisis, well, then suddenly you're worth something.
Yeah, very true.
And we reward performance, like we give a gold medal to the fastest runner. right? So the guy who runs under 9 seconds gets the gold medal, but we don't give acknowledgement to the person who was running 12 seconds and now is suddenly running 10 seconds. His improvement's actually greater. We forget that individual. I play this fantasy football league, the Premier League app with my sons, right? You score points when you score a goal, output.
Yeah.
You score points when you have a clean sheet, output. You don't score points if you're the best player on the field or if you put in the most effort. And that's how life is, right? We don't reward people who learn, who contribute, who grow unless they produce something at the end. And it's not normal. It's also not an Islamic belief, which we tend to forget.
Yeah.
In our belief system is that we believe kun fayakun, be and it shall be.
Yeah.
Right? So who controls output? Our Creator does, not us. But yet we say, see what I delivered, see what I achieved. No, brother, you didn't achieve that. It's Allah who decided that outcome.
But how do we change that mindset? Because, like we said, a simple thing is if you learn something constantly throughout life,
Yes.
and then have to change it. We spoke about golf, right? We both love to play golf.
Yeah.
If you have a bad swing and that's the way you learned, and you played with that swing for 10 years, to change it is extremely difficult. But if you start and go for lessons and do it properly, it's much easier to learn the proper way. Now we're in a position where people have learned the certain way for not only 5 or 10 years, their entire
Decades,
lives.
yeah.
How do we change that perception?
Yeah, the unlearning is difficult, right? And it's something that I guess that's the journey that I speak about in the book, that I've started unlearning, but every day is a challenge. The way to do it, I guess, firstly, is to start with intent. But then to undo what created the learning in the first place. So, earlier on I referred to 2 lives. One, a life of performance. The opposite of that is a life of fulfillment or life of purpose.
Yeah.
Now, most of us think, okay, a life of performance is output and a life of purpose is where we give charity or we give our time. It's actually completely different. The life of purpose and life of performance at a surface level is exactly the same. So what you see from the person is the same, the output is exactly the same, but the reason why they're doing what they're doing is driven by a different intent. And that was, I guess, so, to answer your question differently, that was my shift. My shift was, I spent almost 3 decades in the corporate space doing what I did for validation. Hey, can you see how good I am? Can you see that I exist? When I decided that I wasn't going to do things for applause, and I was going to do it for my own internal fulfillment, everything shifted. Because now I don't need recognition to say I had a good day. I don't need somebody to pat me on the back to say, job well done. I know whether I've done my best by virtue of the effort I put into it.
You mentioned this change, right? And as you mentioned, you spent almost over 3 decades in finance. Was there any particular moment where you decided a change needed to happen, or was it sort of like a gradual thing that happened over time?
Life was knocking on my door often. And what happens is, it happens to all of us. There are signs. We have signs. I had 10 years of various incidents happening. And at the time it happens, you slow down and you think, maybe this is a sign for me. Like, so for example, I was in Addis Ababa, and I had a near-death experience.
Okay, wow.
And the intent, the intensity of it lasted for what, 48 hours, and then I was back into being productive again. I had my son revealed something to me amazing on the evening of his wedding. Again, another moment that should have caused me to reflect a little bit deeper than I did, but a day or 2 later I was back into it again. And so there's these combination or sequence of events, and eventually somebody gifted me this slowing down retreat where we encountered something called conscious connected breathwork. And in that moment, that was like the genie out the bottle moment for me, where I came out of that process understanding I needed to do something different with my life. So it was, I guess, a culmination of, various knocks on my door. Hey, come on, let's, there's something inside of me. And it came from a deep sense of being unfulfilled, right? Which many of us are. I think
Yeah.
we live this life of output, and we produce. Burnout becomes a badge of honor, right? I had a busy week. I had a hectic week. Like you were saying earlier, I had a hectic Ramadan,
Yeah.
right? And we kind of we use that as validation. Um, and when I slowed that down, I realized, okay, well, maybe there's a different way to doing things. And interestingly enough, when I created the space for not needing applause,
Yeah.
uh, that space then filled with a creativity that I never knew I had. And I guess that's the irony, right? We think slowing down is going to be something to fear. How can you slow down? You need to put food on the table,
Yeah.
right? Uh, I wrote this book in 6 months, and I'm a finance guy, right? And yeah, I wrote a book about connecting with your soul. But it was purely because I created the space for the inner me to start speaking to me. Now, when you're busy and you think you're being productive, you drown out that voice.
No, I like the way you put that, because sometimes we don't, like we said, we don't think about it in that way. You think about it in the sense of, okay, if I stop and don't do work for one day, I've lost income for one day. And I say income because unfortunately most of us think like that.
Yeah.
In the sense of, okay, I'd love to start something new. And you hear this all the time. I'd love to go into this business. Okay, how are you going to monetize that? And I feel like that's wrong. That shouldn't be our first thought when we go into something. I think when we go into something, it needs to be, okay, how are we going to, is this number one going to fulfill what we'd like it to fulfill? And how do we achieve the goal that we're setting out to achieve?
Yeah.
And then it should monetize itself. But
Yeah.
I feel we start at the wrong point first.
You're right. I mean, you asked earlier about the advice I would give, and it's similar to that. When you do something, ask why you're doing it. So if you're doing it for applause or validation or to earn a living, well then understand that those are the reasons why you're doing it. But if you're doing it to have a deeper impact, well then the flow and the energy for it becomes different. So for me, when I had this amazing retreat I was speaking about, I came out of it knowing two things. One, that I wasn't prepared to meet our maker because I hadn't fulfilled the gifts that I was given. But two, that this experience for me had been so profound that I wanted to create spaces for others to experience something similar. So now that's all that I do. I dedicate my time to creating those spaces. I'm not less busy than I used to be when I was in the corporate world, when on paper everything said, hey, you're winning. I'm actually busier now than I ever was. But I have levels of creativity and inspiration that I never knew existed. Purely because I'm doing something that came from inside of me, not from needing the applause of society.
No, that's amazing. I want to talk a little bit about the book, right? Firstly, I gotta say I love the title, right? The Path I Didn't Plan, which is so amazing because it actually, in the title alone, kind of tells us everything we need to know about the book. But talk us through that process. What was the, I need to take this and put it into a book? What was that moment like?
It wasn't an idea that I conceptualized, actually.
Okay.
So I'd already had these moments that I referred to earlier, and I came out of this middle of October 2024, this period where I had the genie out the bottle moment, and I knew I was going to spend my time creating spaces for people to experience something similar. And it was in experiencing or in engaging individuals that I came across a guy who wrote a book called The Road to Tarim. Mohamed Ebrahim is also an executive. He works at Old Mutual, and he said, "Listen, man," and he'd seen something that I'd written. So, one of the blessings, I guess, of having a busy life or corporate life was that I traveled a lot, and when I was in a plane or in an airport lounge, I journaled. So I had the content, right, to use the word, and so he'd seen something I'd written, and he said, maybe one of the ways to get your story out there is to think about writing a book. And that was the seed that was planted. And then I just tapped into it. And because I was in a space where, the creative side of me flowed and I wasn't distracted by performance. So I didn't write this, firstly, with the idea of making it a great book or wanting to put out a message. I just wrote for the sake of writing.
Uh-huh.
And so it evolved fairly quickly. And then when I produced the first version, I gave it to a few people in my life who I'm close to, my wife, my daughter, and the immediate response is, we like this, but you're not being authentic enough.
Okay.
You need to go deeper and explain how you felt, because that's your story, and that's what I think they thought people would want to hear. And it was exactly spot on, because I think the people who have read this, the first thing they come back to me with was, thank you for being so vulnerable. You've kind of given us permission to do the same. Because we live these lives, we protect others, or we don't expose what's actually happening inside of us to others.
Yeah.
Right? We put on these masks. And I think as society, even as families, as individuals, I mean, I relate an experience with my own brother, where if we're authentic with each other and honest with each other about actually what's going on inside of us, it'll shift relationships. And so I guess that was the journey of the book, that it was I never intended to write it, but as I wrote it, it was almost cathartic for myself. I mean, there were times when I would write something and I'd be in tears.
Can you imagine? Yeah.
And that's how it quickly evolved. And then the people who were close to me said, there's something here, you should publish this.
You know, if anybody can take anything away from this interview, I'd love for them to take away what you just said there. Give yourself permission to be vulnerable. Because I think, I mean, I know I don't do that. And I know a lot of people think that, we somehow attach that to weakness.
Yeah.
I had a guest a couple of months ago that spoke about his journey. And he opened up. And he spoke about, the time when he had debt collectors at his door. And I remember chatting to him after the interview. And I told him, he said, I'm getting so many messages. And I said, can you please send them to me? I'd love to see them. And so many of them were, thank you for having the courage to tell that story.
Yes.
Because I'm going through the same thing. But I can't say it to anybody. Because we think it's embarrassing, or we think it's a weakness or anything like that. But we don't realize that sometimes is our greatest strength. Vulnerability can be our greatest strength.
It absolutely is. And the first thing is you've got to be vulnerable with yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Because we create this distance from ourselves first. And so we become silent. As I said, the mind and the heart and the soul aren't connected. So then we're distant internally. So can you imagine if you're disconnected, how disconnected you are from your spouse, how disconnected you are from your children or your parents or the people you work with, right? You can only be connected and vulnerable if you yourself are prepared to admit what's going on with you. And we have a very real example that we often don't refer to. So the story is the one of the Prophet Muhammad when he received the first revelation. So for those who don't know, he was in a cave and the angel Jibreel came to him and gave him the first verse of the Quran. Now what did he do? What did he do when he got that first verse? Do you know?
He ran home to his wife.
There we go. Now, he did something that a masculine, the modern man doesn't associate with, right? So here was somebody who was created, or the most favorite of mankind, if you like. He received this revelation, and the first thing he did was went to his partner, his wife, okay? And he didn't just go to her, he went to her in fear and vulnerability, as you said. He was authentic. He said, this is what's happened, protect me, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Right? He didn't go and say, you know who I am? This is, right?
Yeah.
He said, this is what's happening. So therein is our lesson. As men, it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay also to go to your wife and say, protect me, because I need your help. There's nothing wrong with it. We think it's weakness. But that's actually our deepest strength. And then on the flip side, because this isn't just about men, what did Khadija, his wife, do? She didn't say, you were in the cave for a week, you get what you deserve, right? Like, we go out, you're with your friends. No. She said, okay, I know who you are. And our Creator will never embarrass you that way. So she uplifted him at a time when he was being most vulnerable, as opposed to criticizing him. So, there are lessons in all of this, I guess, for us, which we tend to see our history as something to look on without substance.
Yeah.
You know, we tend to see the superficial as opposed to the depth of it.
No, very, very true. You mentioned obviously this new courses that you're doing. If somebody would like to get involved, how do they go about that?
So there are numerous ways. I'm happy to share my contact details with you that you can, I guess, put onto the podcast,
Yeah.
or onto the show. But there's a website. The website's called, or the program is called Awaken, Align, Ascend, which I'll explain just now. There's a website, awakenalignascend.com. And that's the best way to have a look at what's on offer. And essentially, the platform was named after the journey that I experienced. There was an awakening, or a few awakenings before I decided to listen to it. And then as a result of this awakening was then a decision to align my life in line with what had come to me. And then ascension is the end goal, but it's unique to each person. And it also acknowledges that ascension's out of our hands. So in terms of what we provide with people, we provide them the opportunity to awaken, then we give them the tools to align, and then the ascension, that's between that person and our creator. And each person's ascension is different. It could be that you want to pivot. Your ascension could be pivoting into a different type of career. My ascension could be becoming a better husband. Someone else's could be becoming a better teacher. You know, each person's ascension is unique, but this is, I guess, the program that we've developed to help people just to slow down, understand that slowing down isn't falling behind. That's actually taking a step forward, and helping them do that in a way that's connected with nature, that's connected with the tools that we've been presented with, that just help you access a part of you that was silent for a long time.
I mentioned at the start of the interview that I have a certain amount of questions that I actually ask at the end of the interview. Now we did one of them at the beginning, but another question that I ask all my guests is, what message would you like people to take away from this interview?
Not to be afraid of what could happen if you are courageous enough to create stillness in your life. Because I think that's the fear. You touched on it earlier, that we kind of know intrinsically or intuitively that we're running hard unnecessarily.
Yeah.
We know that we're living unfulfilled lives, but we're too afraid of the alternative. The alternative means you've got to slow down, you've got to become vulnerable, you've got to face what's inside of you. And my message would be, don't be afraid of that. Because if anything, my own journey and the journey of others that we now work with has revealed that whatever comes out of that is more beautiful than you can imagine. It's more creative than you can imagine. It's more fulfilling than you can imagine. When you no longer chase applause, you find a contentment, I guess. Contentment is such an English word, right? But that contentment is so infectious. And once you find it, it stays.
Actually, you said such an English word. I love that word. Because I feel like a lot, I met a person a while ago, and I'm inherently not a very jealous person. And I'm going to say that I was very jealous of this person. Not because of the things, the items they had, or the house they had, or the car they drove, or the job they had.
They had peace.
But because that person was so content in their place. And I actually looked at it like that, and I was like, phew, I wish I could be that content.
Yeah.
But it's very important. I think realizing, because it goes back to that, right? If we have the certain goals in mind, and specific goals, it's always going to be what's the next goal after that. But if we have contentment as our goal, then there's actually a finish line that doesn't constantly move.
Yeah.
I think everything else just sort of constantly moves. You have what's your goal in 10 years, then what's your goal in 10 years, then what's your goal in 10 years. But if we have that, you know what, I'd like to get into a place where I'm just content. That goalpost doesn't really move that much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that.
And how easy it is to wish that for everyone else. So there's a saying, that a true measure of a believer is that when he wishes for others what he wishes for himself.
Yeah.
Right? So if you wish contentment for yourself, how easy is it to say, yes, I wish the same for others?
Yeah.
As opposed to, I want to drive a Ferrari and I want my neighbor to drive a Ferrari. That's hard to do.
Yeah.
Right? And let's be honest, there's a shortage of resources. Only everyone can't be a CEO, as an example.
Yeah.
But everyone can find contentment. And you can easily wish that and seriously desire that for everyone around you.
No. Brilliant. Imraan, Jazakallah, thank you so much for
Thank you for
joining us
having
today.
me.
I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this conversation.
No, same here. Thank you
Um,
for having me.
we wish you obviously all the best of success with the book and this new journey that you've taken yourself on. And thank you for sharing it with our viewers and our listeners. And yeah, it is a real pleasure to have you. I'm sure we're going to trouble you again and have you on the show again.
No,
But
thank you.
thanks for being here
I
today.
hope it was meaningful for your viewers too, and thank you for the opportunity.
No, our pleasure. All right, that's our show. So much to unpack from this episode, but I'm just going to leave it at this. Let's just take the time and slow down. My name is Mohamed Ebrahim Tayob, and you're watching Chat EbT. Until next time.